Rebecca, it's so good to finally meet you.
It's great to finally meet you too, Roseanne. I'm so excited to be in your video series.
I'm very curious to know about your book. You told me you wrote this book that's called Tears in a Jar. I love the name. And I also love how the story, because I have clients that will totally resonate with your story. And I'm sure there will be a lot of people that will be helped just by reading your, what do you call, memoir, right?
Yes, and that is my hope as well. That's one of the reasons I wrote it, was to help a lot of people. The other reason I wrote it was because the situations that I talk about in the book that I was experiencing are so bizarre. People used to say to me, "You should write a book," so I did.
Great. Tears in a Jar. Tell me how you got inspired with this name, with this title.
I got inspired for this title, and I actually talk about this also at the end of the book, but one of my friends is an Aramaic scholar. And I was talking to him one day about an upcoming court hearing or something. I don't even remember what it was. And he told me this story that there's a story in Jewish tradition that God keeps a jar on his desk with tears of the women. And that's what keeps him from destroying the world. He looks at this jar of tears. And so I said to my friend, I said, "How many of those do you think are mine?" And he said, "Oh no, you have your own jar." And when I started out with titles, I actually had a different title picked out for the book. I had originally called it Motherhood Stolen, going with my soul murdering theme and all of this. But it didn't really resonate with people. They didn't get it. The original editing team that I had the book with were like, "We don't get it. You should pick something else that honors all of your loss, because it was much more than just your motherhood loss." And I thought, well, okay, so I made my list of titles and I put Tears in a Jar on it, because I liked that kind of mystery title. It's kind of a mysterious title. It would be very interesting to me if I was in a bookstore and I saw Tears in a Jar as a title. I thought this would be a very interesting title.
I think it's very interesting. It catches your attention. Tears in a Jar. Yeah.
Exactly. Right. And then when I said it out loud, I said, "Tears in a jar," and I went, I like it. I'm gonna go with that.
You talk about your soul was murdered, right? That you felt so defeated that your soul was murdered. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Mostly my soul murdering was referring to the way I was feeling with having to deal with some of the ramifications of this faith community turn. So like I just said to a friend of mine the other day, actually, when we were talking about my book, and I said to her, "It's really sad to me that I was raised in the church and I had to go to a synagogue to have somebody hug me and say, 'This is awful.'" The book isn't so much about the characters as it is, this was my experience, and I'm sure you have clients that it will resonate with, because when I started to talk about these issues, the domestic violence, legal abuse, all those sorts of things that start to happen in family court, it's been really disturbing to me how many women have come to speak to me about these things.
What is the main message in the book that you are helping people with?
There's two main messages. And the first message is for people that, again, are in those legal professions, people like my custody evaluator, and my attorney was very good, but, attorneys and judges and those types of people that are interacting with people that are starting to have this very common experience. And so the message for them is that, on the surface, people can come and say all sorts of things about somebody in a situation, but that's not necessarily what's going on, and really look at these things and what's happening and what's best for the children, and make your decisions with a slightly different calculation, perhaps. The other piece of it is for those families, for those children, mostly for those women, although I know there are men that go through this. I haven't had as much contact with the men that end up in this boat. And that's for them to know that, they're not alone, and you can have a life after this. In fact, when you get to the end of the book, I talk a little bit about what my relationships are like with some of the people, some of the characters, at this point, on the other side of that really harrowing experience. So it's kind of a twofold. How the theme brought me to here, I don't know. I think it has caused me to be a little more introspective on things. And then when it culminated into the events of this book, and when it really got to that crisis point, then I was able to kind of sit back and say, well, I don't care what anybody thinks. It was a very freeing experience, because then I was able to say, well, I've tried to do all these things that I think these communities around me think I should be, right? And it's still not good enough. I'm still being bullied. I'm still putting up with all this. And look at where this got me. Look at where this got my life, following this path, trying to appease these people that are just bullies. And now I'm going to go and do my own thing. So
how can you sum it up so for somebody that's just curious to know the story?
So the way I describe it is it's really a story of loss and restoration, and it's not so much a tale of woe, which many of these are, right? Many of these divorce memoirs are very woe is me, and there is some of that in there. There is a lot of sadness in there. There is a lot of pain in there, but then it moves over to this other phase where so many of these problems have positive resolutions to them. So it starts out with a little introduction about me, and then I outline these various characters, my first husband, some of the church people, things like that, some of the traumatic events, where I had an inpatient evaluation and things of that nature that were rather jarring to me. And then it ends with my youngest children and myself after my ex-husband died, and some of the conversations that my children had with me about what their experience was and some of the questions that they had for me.
How does the story end? What's the message, the final message in the story? When you end the book and the story, what is the message?
You're not alone, and there can be a life after this. And the other message is things aren't always as they seem. And the way the scene that I ended it with was a conversation that my son, who drew the cover for me, had with me. And he came up to me and he said, Mom, you're not at all like these people painted you. Why did people lie so much? And I thought that was an interesting ending to bring in, because it goes back to that other theme of things are not always the way they're presented. Sometimes we have to look really deep into, what's happening here.
So Rebecca, if somebody is one would like to have a word of advice from you that went through all this story, maybe somebody is going through similar situations that you have been, and now you wrote this book, and they come to you and they say, what is one thing you can say to me that will help me, keep on going, and that, there's a light at the end of the tunnel or something like that? What is your word of advice for them?
So I'm actually working on building some programming around that as well, because as I was saying to you, I'm really disturbed by the number of people that have been coming that have these issues. Because it makes me very sad that it's comforting to me. Don't get me wrong, that I'm not alone, but it's also profoundly disturbing to me. So the main thing that I tell people is that it's a process. Everything is a process. These things are all temporary. And if you give it enough time, the truth will eventually come out. People can hide, that's true. People can hide their true colors. We've all met people like that. But eventually it all comes out in the wash.
Yes, I like to say that life is like the waves in the ocean. Sometimes you're like down the bottom, and then you come back up again, and then down. And you got to learn how to surf the waves, of the life ocean, ocean of life.
Right. I think people also, they get very wrapped up in, the everyday hurts of things. And, a lot of the people who hurt me have since passed away, for example, and I'm still here. And, I'm not planning to go anywhere anytime soon. Granted, tomorrow's not promised to any of us, but, I plan to be around for a while. So, I try to encourage people with this idea that not so much that they'll outlive people that are doing hurtful things, but that this is not defining them. This is not a permanent state of being. In my early draft of my book, I actually had an acknowledgement to the people that hurt me, thanking them for a very interesting story to tell. And one of my friends, she said, well, how can you include them in your acknowledgments? And I said, look at the very interesting story they've given me to tell. You have to tell me when you finish the book how interesting you think it is. But I honestly, without these people, I wouldn't have this story to tell, to have this conversation with you today.
That's what I say from victim to victory, because you overcame your life story, and now you became, that served you to write this book and to help many other people with it, right?
Right. And as I said, a lot of people would say to me, this is a very strange story. I mean, like, part of the story, I don't know how far you've gotten, but part of the story I talk about how after my ex-husband died, I had to have a custody hearing after he died. So we had this custody hearing, me and someone who's dead. And this is a very bizarre situation, and most people can't wrap their minds around. You had a custody hearing with the dead. Yes, I had a custody hearing with the dead. And so I have that in the book. I talk about some of these things that are just, they're so weird. It's like, so that was the origin for the book. But as I said, as I started to kind of write the book and look at things, it's a very different book than I think anybody would have predicted.
So where is the book available, Rebecca? You want to tell everyone?
So it's at Amazon. It's at several other stores. What I tell people to do is books2read.com, which is books2read.com and /tears in a jar. And it'll take you to, that's like the main link, and it'll take you to a link where there's like 8 or 9 different stores it's available in, and people can click which store they want to go to.
Awesome. Rebecca, so now to wrap up this video interview, what is your favorite quote?
My favorite quote is Soren Kierkegaard's, once you label me, you negate me. Because I think people use labels very often to negate other people and ideas, especially today.
That's so true. Yes. Label free here. Yeah.
Right. I try to live my life label free. I think it's better that way.
Right. Yes, I love that quote. All right. So thank you so much. It was so nice to learn more about you, Rebecca, and your book. And I hope that if you're watching this video and you resonate with what we talked here, if your life has been like a series of painful events, similar or, different, but painful, like Rebecca, and you wanted to have some inspiration, just read Tears in a Jar. I think it's going to be an amazing thing for you. And if you need any assistance with coaching, you can look for Rebecca or myself, and we're here to help you. Namaste, Rebecca.
Namaste.